Hi there, welcome back. In this module, we're going to be talking about simplifying your message. Have you ever been in a conversation or presentation when someone says something and you think to yourself, what the heck did he just say? You know there was a point in there somewhere, but you just can't seem to find it. Here's the thing. It really doesn't matter how good your analysis is if no one can understand it. In fact, in 2016, Fast Company ranked strong communication skills as the 7th most important skill for career success. That skill even beat out understanding analytics. If you want people to understand you, you have to communicate simply and clearly. That's what we're going to focus on in this module. I'm going to teach you a simple technique for improving the simplicity and clarity of your communication. I call it the 1-1-1 rule. So let's jump in. A while back, I received a newsletter with the following paragraph. I'll give you a few seconds to look at it. So, what did you think? That's quite a mouthful. More importantly, it's quite a brainful. Did you find yourself having to go back and reread parts of it? For a relatively short paragraph, it takes a lot of work to get through it. That's a problem. The more difficult it is for someone to understand your point, the harder it's going to be for him or her to make a decision. Remember, our brains are like the bouncer we talked about in Module 1. They don't like to work hard. The more you throw at them, the more they use their shortcuts and tricks to work through the information. The key to helping people better understand you is breaking your ideas down into single units that can be understood easily and quickly. The 1-1-1 rule focuses on organizing information. You can apply it to a document, a presentation, a memo, or even a speech. So let me show you how I changed the paragraph using the 1-1-1 rule. The first one in the rule is one idea per sentence. Now you might be thinking, well, that's obvious. Of course I'd only have one idea per sentence. But you might be surprised. Very often we combine multiple thoughts into a single sentence. As you could see, the first sentence was pretty long. That's a red flag. Long sentences usually contain multiple ideas. The problem is that our brains process information one piece at a time. They may quickly switch back and forth between multiple things, but they can only focus on one at a time. Every time your brain switches between things, it needs to take time to reset. That's what slows down understanding and decision-making. It's important to let your brain stop and rest between ideas. Otherwise, it's trying to juggle and keep track of all of them at once. That's when misunderstanding, confusion, and slower decision-making happen. To understand this particular sentence, your brain had to make sense of and keep track of 3 separate ideas. The first idea is the context. Who is it talking about? In this case, the sentence is talking about people who are in the bottom half of wage earners. Now, not only is that one of 3 ideas in the sentence to keep track of, the author stated it in 2 different ways. The first time it says bottom half of wage earners. The second time it says wage earners in the bottom 50%. Now, I know what you're thinking. It doesn't take a lot of thought to figure out that's the same group. You're right, but it does take some thought. When you refer to the same thing in 2 different ways, your audience has to pause their thinking, even if just slightly, to compare the 2 pieces of data to make sure they're the same. The next 2 ideas in the sentence provided the so what about that group. The second idea had to do with their average income. It's been flat since 1980. The third idea talks about the amount of income they control. It's decreased. Both of those points are related, but they're separate issues. Now take a look at the colored words again. Not only were there 3 separate ideas in the sentence, but each idea was broken up. Instead of making each point simply, clearly, and distinctly, all 3 were combined and mixed into a single sentence. To make sense of this, your brain has to keep switching back and forth. That's what made it so hard to read. Now here's the exact same information with the 1 idea per sentence rule applied. It's much easier to get through it. Look at the colors. Each idea is now contained in its own sentence. And the idea is expressed start to finish with no interruptions. The words are almost identical to the original example. All that's changed is how they were organized. But that makes a huge difference. How much of a difference does it make? Well, I'm sure the second version felt easier. However, we can quantify it. There's a common metric used to determine how easy it is to read a document. It's called the Flesch-Kincaid grade level score. As its name implies, this metric uses grade level in school as a proxy for difficulty. A Flesch-Kincaid grade level score of 7 means that you'd need to be in at least 7th grade to easily read and understand the text. Now, because this is a calculation, it doesn't perfectly line up to a grade level. In theory, the metric can take values from -3.4 to infinity. Now, obviously, there's no grade levels on either end. In reality, you're most likely to see scores ranging from 4 to 18. Don't get too hung up on the word grade level. Just remember that lower means simpler. Most people recommend that you try to keep your writing between 6th and 8th grade. Believe it or not, that's the level at which most books, magazines, and newspapers are written. Therefore, it's the level that most people are used to seeing. So, how do the two versions of the story we've been looking at compare? The original version clocked in with a Flesch-Kincaid grade level score of 19.7. Yikes! That's more than double the difficulty that people are used to reading at. It didn't just feel hard to read, it was hard to read. Okay, so how much did our 111 rule help? Well, quite a bit. The revised version came in at 9.7. Now, I know it's a little bit above the guideline I gave you earlier, but it's clearly much easier to read. The words barely changed, but reorganizing them into simple, discrete ideas cut the difficulty in understanding them. Now, perhaps that example felt a bit extreme. No one writes big, huge, long sentences like that, right? Well, here's another example that might look a little more similar to what you're used to seeing. This sentence is deceiving. It's not as long as the first example. However, it still has multiple ideas for your brain to juggle. Did you catch them all? How many did you see in that sentence? Take another look. There are 5 separate ideas in the sentence. First, sales of Earth-Safe soap have done well. Second, there was a slow start. Third, their sales accounted for 50% of all revenue growth. Fourth, they didn't do as well in Latin America. And fifth, in Latin America, sales remained flat. That's 5 ideas in one sentence. That's 5 different things for your brain to have to track as it reads through the sentence. You're probably going to have to read through it a few times to fully internalize all of those messages. Now here it is rewritten. It's a little longer, but it's actually much simpler. In fact, I bet that despite its length, it was quicker and easier to get through. Your brain has a chance to get each idea completely before moving on. So how much easier was it? Well, let's look back at the numbers. The first version had a Flesch-Kincaid grade level of 14. The revised version came in at just 4.1. Now that's simplification. Shorter sentences with one idea are easier to understand. Now here's one final thing about the Flesch-Kincaid grade level calculation. If you use Microsoft Office, you can get your documents and emails scored automatically with this metric. Just Google "turn on readability statistics" in Microsoft Office and include your version. Once you turn it on, you'll get your score along with some other readability metrics every time you run a spell check. Now there's different processes for setting it up in Word and Outlook, so be sure you get both sets of directions if you need them. If you don't use Microsoft Office, there's online tools that will also calculate the Flesch-Kincaid grade level score for you. Just Google Flesch-Kincaid grade level online calculator or something like that. So okay, that's the first one in the 111 rule. One idea per sentence. Don't force people's brains to juggle multiple ideas at once. Split your ideas up so that each one can be read, processed, and understood. Then move on to the next one. The second one in the 111 rule is one theme per paragraph. Remember, the goal is to let your brain focus on one thing at a time before moving on to something else. Let's look at the original example again. It's just one paragraph, but there's 2 separate themes. The first theme has to do with the bottom half of wage earners. The second theme has to do with the top 1%. That's 2 different groups. They should be separated. In this case, applying the one theme per paragraph rule is pretty simple. All you have to do is hit return between the 2 themes. Now your brain has a natural starting and stopping point. It can fully process one of those before moving on to the next one. As I said before, the words are almost the same, it's all about how you organize them. However, I did do a couple of other things to make it more simple. First, I applied the one idea per sentence rule from earlier. I also added 5 words to the first paragraph. Have taken quite a hit. These 5 words summarize the idea of the paragraph. In the original version, you had to read the 2 separate ideas about the group and figure out if and how they tied together. In the new version, I made that connection for you. That way, you're back to focusing on only one thing. The 2 points about income and share of income just become supporting details for an overall bigger point. Here's another simple change. In the second paragraph, I didn't repeat 1980 and 2014 as the date range. I simply stated it's the same as the ones we referred to earlier. That way, you didn't have to read the 2 dates in the second paragraph and then compare them back to the first paragraph to see if they were the same. It might seem obvious to you that you're talking about the same range. However, chances are your reader has to make a conscious or subconscious comparison just to be sure. Every extra step between your point and your audience's understanding of your point is an opportunity for bias, misunderstanding, and misperceptions to creep in. Whenever possible, try to reduce the amount of extra or redundant information you provide. Okay, so you've got the first 2 ones in the 1-1-1 rule. The final is also pretty simple. 1 decision or action per presentation. While simple in concept, this is probably the hardest one to implement. People tend to try to cram everything into one presentation. We want to get everything done at once while everyone's in one place. That's a nice thought, but it really doesn't work. It's better to have a large number of small focused discussions or communications than a small number of large presentations trying to cover everything. At a minimum, if you want your audience to make multiple decisions in the same meeting or within the same presentation, separate them. Introduce each one separately. Have a very clear start and end point for each, and then move on to the next. Remember, your brain works serially. Keep it focused by providing just one thing at a time. The 1-1-1 rule. 1 idea per sentence, 1 theme per paragraph, 1 decision per discussion or presentation. The easier you make it for someone to understand you, the easier you make it for him or her to make a decision. Now, after this video, I'd encourage you to take a look at some of your presentations or communications and see where you have opportunities to apply the 1-1-1 rule. Thanks for tuning into this segment. In our next module, I'm going to give you some tips for turning large amounts of information into simple, clear statements of action.